Before we start this episode of Sleepy Crime, let me know in the comments if you enjoy half-hour or full-hour stories more. Want to create the best nighttime experience possible for you all. Now, welcome back to Sleepy Crime. Lay your phone to the side and enjoy tonight's story. Don't forget to subscribe for nightly true crime stories. Let's begin. The Postmaster's Ledger. Part 1, The Village of Glenlow. Nestled among emerald hills and ancient stone fences, the village of Glenlow seemed preserved in amber. Its narrow lanes curled like ribbon between old cottages and sloped gently toward the sea. Sheep dotted the highlands, chimneys puffed like sleepy sighs, and nothing ever truly changed, except the post. The Glenlow post office was a small, slate-roofed building at the end of Wren Street. Ivy crept up its walls, and its brass postbox gleamed dully under a wooden awning. The building had stood for over a century, and for the last 4 decades, it had been kept by Mr. Reuben Latch. Reuben, now in his 70s, moved like a man whose bones knew each floorboard. He wore a dark wool vest over a buttoned shirt, always tucked, and a navy tie faded with age. His spectacles slipped often, and he pushed them up with a single practiced finger. He lived alone in the flat above the post office, where the ticking of clocks and the scratching of his fountain pen were the only sounds. He opened at 8 every morning. Rain or shine. Fog or frost. The townspeople trusted him. He had memorized everyone's handwriting. He had a quiet ritual of sorting letters before unlocking the front door. He handled every envelope like it contained a confession. But one morning in March 1986, that routine changed. He came downstairs to find something waiting, not in the postbox, but slid beneath the door. A single envelope. No stamp. No return address. Written in shaky black ink were the words. For Mr. Latch, concerning the ledger. Reuben paused. His tea cooled on the windowsill. The word ledger hadn't passed his mind in decades, yet here it was again, tugging at the edge of something old, and maybe unfinished. Part 2, The Letter No One Sent. He took the envelope back upstairs to the quiet of his flat. The lamplight made the edges of the paper glow amber. It smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. He opened it with care, sliding a letter out slowly like a secret being unwrapped. The paper was thick. Handmade, possibly. The message, handwritten in the same trembling ink, said, "You missed one. 1952, you know which." Reuben sat down heavily in the chair beside the hearth. The only thing he ever kept from that time was the green-bound ledger, a relic of the post's old internal delivery system. Back then, Glenlow had no daily mail service. Villagers would leave hand-addressed letters at the post office for same-day local delivery. Reuben had tracked everyone in his ledger: sender, recipient, date, route, and initials of the carrier. He hadn't thought of it in years. He went to the cabinet beneath the counter, where a brass key still hung inside the drawer. The ledger was there, dusty but whole. Bound in faded green leather, its corners worn soft. He brought it to the light, opened it to 1952, and began flipping slowly. The handwriting was his own, small and precise. Then he found it, a torn page. The only torn page in the entire book. The stitching at the spine had been disturbed, 1 page missing, maybe 2. It was no accident. Part 3, Tea with Memories. Reuben poured himself a cup of Earl Grey and stared out the window, steam drifting past the lace curtains. He tried to remember what had happened in 1952. That was the year of the harsh winter. Pipes froze. Miss Tallett's shop burned. And that was the year Thomas Eddowes disappeared. He hadn't thought of Thomas in ages. A quiet boy, no more than 23. He wore a long wool coat and always had a satchel over his shoulder, though no one knew where he went each morning. He lived in a rented room above the tailor's and paid in advance, month by month. Friendly, but private. He smiled easily, but only once. Thomas had sent letters, Reuben recalled. 3 or 4 in total. Always to the same address, somewhere near the village outskirts. Reuben remembered the envelopes because the handwriting was tight, mathematical. The recipient's name was never clear, always just initials. Then one day, Thomas simply didn't show up. His landlord said he'd left quietly during the night, but his belongings were still in the room: coat, shoes, a worn paperback about ciphers and codes. The police made a note. Nothing more came of it. But the torn ledger page, it would have listed a letter. A delivery from Thomas. Or to him. Was it possible someone had removed it deliberately? And now, someone was reminding him. Part 4, the photograph. The following morning, Reuben woke earlier than usual. It was still dark when he pulled on his cardigan, the silence of the village holding gently outside his window. He descended the narrow staircase with its familiar creak on the 3rd step and opened the front door to check the box. Another envelope lay there. No stamp. No address. Sealed with red wax, pressed with a mark he didn't recognize. It looked like a tree, perhaps, or a branching river. Reuben turned it over, fingers steady but cold, and broke the seal. Inside was a single black and white photograph. It showed the post office from decades ago. Judging by the make of the bicycle leaning against the rail and the knee socks on the schoolboy walking past, he guessed it was early 1950s, maybe 52 exactly. The sign above the door was freshly painted. The windows clearer then. But there was something strange about the image. In the window, just behind the lace curtain, a face stared out. Not his. Not anyone he recognized. Gaunt, with hollowed eyes and the faintest impression of a smile. The face was watching, just off-center. On the back of the photo, in the same shaky handwriting as before, was a message. He knew. Reuben sat down at the counter, the photo still in his hand. He didn't know what unsettled him more, the message, or the fact that he wasn't sure who he was anymore. And the more he stared at the photo, the more certain he became of something else. This was taken from inside a building across the street. Only one window aligned at that angle. The tailor's shop. Where Thomas Eddowes once lived. Part 5, the tailor's upstairs room. By late afternoon, after the usual trickle of parcels and pension letters, Reuben walked across the narrow street. The tailor's shop hadn't changed much, still run by Edna Blythe, who had inherited it from her father. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as he entered. "Reuben," Edna said, looking up from a waistcoat. "Well, now. You don't usually stray this far." "Afternoon, Edna. I was wondering if the old upstairs room is still let." Edna smiled politely, then grew thoughtful. "Not in some time. Last tenant we had was, good heavens. That odd young man, Eddowes, was it? That'd be over 30 years ago." Reuben nodded. "May I see it?" "Just, out of curiosity." Edna looked at him for a moment, searching his face. "Suppose there's no harm. I'll get the spare key." She led him up a narrow, carpeted stair, and opened the door with a rusty turn. The room was simple: bed frame, desk, empty shelves. Dust danced in the light coming through the small window. Reuben stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of old varnish. The view overlooked the post office directly, just as he'd thought. There were scratch marks on the window ledge. Not many, but deliberate, like someone had rested an object there, over and over. A camera, perhaps. Edna stayed in the doorway. Strange lad, he was. Kept to himself. Always writing letters with no names. Reuben turned. "You saw the letters?" "Only the outside. Always addressed the same, to A.E. or something like that." "Gave them to you, didn't he?" Reuben nodded, though now he wasn't sure he ever delivered them. He'd need to find out. Part 6, the parcel shelf. That evening, with the sky turning to velvet, Reuben descended into the storeroom beneath the post office. Few people knew it was there. It had once been a coal cellar, now lined with neat rows of shelves and old trunks. Reuben used it to store unclaimed items, postal mistakes, and things he couldn't bear to throw away. He lit the hanging bulb. The pull chain clicked softly. He moved slowly, scanning the labels: undelivered 1973. Forwarded 1968. Returned mail, miscellaneous. Then finally, near the bottom. Local holds, ledger years. He opened the crate. Inside were yellowed envelopes tied with twine. Each bore initials instead of names: MD, SK, and, yes, several marked AE. He untied the twine and spread them on the workbench. The handwriting was unmistakably Thomas's. Narrow, compressed. Measured. One letter had been opened, though not by Reuben. It had been sliced neatly, cleanly. Inside, a short note. "It's closer than you think. Under the third stair. I cannot keep it here." Another envelope, sealed and untouched, felt heavier than the others. Reuben turned it over. In small lettering, someone had penciled on the back: "If found after 1985, give only to RL." Reuben blinked. He opened it. Inside was a key. Old, iron, and rusted at the teeth. And a folded note. "You trusted the ledger. So did I. The truth is beneath it all. If they come, don't let them take the page again. T." Reuben looked at the key. He had no idea what it opened. But he knew where to start. Part 7, The Third Stair. The post office staircase was narrow and slightly crooked, worn smooth in the middle by decades of Reuben's steps. But now he stood still, counting aloud beneath his breath. 1, 2, 3. The third stair from the bottom had always creaked the loudest. He'd never thought much of it. It was just part of the building's character. But now, with the letter's cryptic message echoing in his mind, he crouched and pressed his fingers along the edges. There, a seam. Barely visible, but definitely there. He fetched a small screwdriver from the repair drawer and worked it gently along the side. With a soft pop, the top of the stair lifted like a hinged lid. Inside was a hollow space no larger than a shoebox. And in it, a small canvas pouch, tied shut with a leather strap, and a scrap of cloth that had once been blue but had faded to a washed-out gray. Reuben pulled the pouch out and placed it on the counter upstairs. He loosened the strap. Inside were two things: a folded document, and a small silver pendant with initials engraved in looping script, AE. He unfolded the document. It was a page from the missing section of the ledger. Sender, T. Edaus. Recipient, A.E. Delivery date, January 14, 1952. Delivery route, hand transfer. Carrier, R.L., initialed by Reuben himself. He stared at the bottom of the page, where a strange note had been scrawled in red pencil. Letter returned. Recipient unknown. Marked, deceased. Part 8. A name that disappeared. Reuben rubbed his temples, the pendant still in his hand. A.E. The name had always been a mystery in his records. No full name, no address ever listed clearly. Just those initials. He returned to the ledger, flipping forward past that January in 1952, checking entries until April. Nothing more from Thomas. Nothing more to or from A.E. Had he written the letters after learning A.E. had died? Or, had he discovered the death while trying to send the letter? And who was A.E.? The name, or lack of it, rang a bell. He rose from his desk and walked to the locked filing cabinet beside the heater. Inside were records of every resident from the past 50 years, mostly from old village census data and post accounts. He searched carefully, flipping through the LS, then the ES. Nothing. No AE in any rental logs or mail records. But in the back of the drawer was a thin, yellow folder labeled Non-Resident Mail Holds, 1952. He opened it. One slip fell out, a pink carbon copy marked Not Claimed. Addressee, Althea Everston. Initials, AE. Reuben whispered it. Althea. He remembered now, barely. She was a recluse who had lived in a cottage out near the southern woods. Strange, solitary. Rarely seen in town. She had moved there, they said, after the war. Some believed she was a widow, others claimed she was never married. And then one winter she was gone. No funeral. No body. Just, disappeared. Part 9, The Southern Cottage. That night, the wind stirred the ivy outside the windows, brushing it like fingers across glass. Reuben lay awake, the silver pendant on the table beside his bed, its engraving catching the moonlight. The next morning, he walked south, past the hedgerows, beyond the old sheep pens and onto a dirt path he hadn't walked in years. Birds chirped lazily in the hedges. The morning fog was still lifting when he reached the edge of the woods. The cottage was there, barely. Its roof sagged in the middle, and ivy had claimed most of the front. A rusted gate leaned against the fence. Reuben pushed through the brush and stepped carefully inside. The door was still latched, but a broken window allowed easy entry. Inside, the air was stale. Dust floated like ash in the filtered light. Shelves still held jars of dried herbs. A fireplace stood cold and unused, and there was a strange calm in the space, as if it had simply waited. On a desk in the far corner, beneath a cloth, Reuben found a wooden box. Inside were scraps of paper. Diagrams. Cipher wheels. Letters, written and rewritten, none addressed. And one final note, in sharp cursive. If the page is ever found, they'll know. Burn the ledger before they burn the rest. Reuben stepped back. The ledger wasn't just a record. It was evidence. But of what? Part 10, A Gentle Confession. Reuben returned from the southern woods slowly, the pendant and the cipher scraps wrapped carefully in his coat pocket. By the time he reached the village, the fog had risen into a thin gray veil that gave the cottages an almost dreamlike softness. Back inside the post office, he set the fire and sat by it for a long while, holding the note in one hand and staring at the ledger with the other. Burn it? Destroy the one clean record of truth he'd ever kept. He couldn't, not yet. Not without understanding. He returned to the page with the note, recipient unknown. Marked, deceased. Reuben knew that mark. It was never casually applied. It meant the letter had been returned after a formal notification. Someone had claimed the recipient was dead. But who? The delivery had been hand-transferred. That meant Reuben himself had attempted the delivery. And if his own initials were there, then he was the one who brought the letter to Althea's door. And yet, he had no memory of that. Nothing. Just a gap, a curtain of fog across that winter. Had someone intercepted it? He stood suddenly and retrieved the town's burial records. They were thin, no more than a ledger of obituaries and notices clipped from local papers. There was no listing for Althea Everston. Not in 1952. Not ever. Part 11, The Visitor. The next morning was crisp and unusually still. Reuben opened the post office as usual. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. A man stepped inside. Tall. Polished shoes. A coat too formal for Glen Low, and gloves that didn't match the season. He looked around slowly, his expression pleasant but unreadable. "Good morning," he said. "I'm looking for Mr. Latch." "That would be me," Reuben replied. The man smiled gently and stepped forward. "I'm a researcher. Archival work. Postal history, mostly." I was told you kept detailed records from the local route years. Reuben studied him. Some. Yes. The man nodded. Fascinating things, aren't they? Records. Ledgers. They tell stories even when the people forget them. He looked down at the counter. I believe you have a page I'm looking for. Reuben said nothing. The man reached into his coat and placed a card on the counter. There was no name. Just an emblem, a tree with deep roots, branching like veins. The same mark that had sealed the wax envelope. Reuben's heart ticked slowly. I don't recall having anything belonging to you. Don't you? The man asked. Strange how things come back. Letters, names. People thought lost. He let the silence hang, then added, if it finds its way to Ash, we'll consider the matter closed. Then he turned, smiled once, and left. Part 12, The Fire That Didn't Burn. Reuben sat at the window for a long while after the man left, the fire in the hearth snapping softly. He now understood. This ledger was not merely inconvenient to someone, it was dangerous. A record of something they didn't want remembered. The missing page proved an attempt to reach Althea. But someone had stopped it, claimed she was dead, and erased the trail. And now, decades later, someone still cared enough to retrieve the truth. He laid the ledger on the table. Ran his hand across its cracked leather. He could destroy it. It would be easy. Toss it in the fire, close the grate, and watch it curl into blackened curls. But instead, he placed it gently into a satchel and locked it inside his personal drawer. That night, he made tea. He folded the cipher notes, the pendant, the restored page, all of it, into a separate envelope marked, to be opened only if I am gone. He placed it in the back of the cellar crate, behind the parcels of 1968. Then he climbed the stairs, turned off the lamp, and sat in the darkness. Some stories aren't forgotten. They wait. Quietly. Just like letters with no names. Part 13, A Whisper Through the Window. A week passed. The village moved as it always had, quietly. A few parcels, pension envelopes, and birthday cards came through the post. Mrs. Ellery mailed one to her grandson in Bristol. Young Peter from the bakery brought Reuben a buttered scone as thanks for helping him post a university application. Nothing remarkable happened. But Reuben noticed small things. Footsteps on gravel in the early morning. The red postbox lid slightly ajar, though he was certain he hadn't touched it. And once, late at night, he heard a knock. Just once. Soft, like the back of a knuckle brushing wood. When he opened the door, there was no one there. But on the ground sat another envelope. This one was old, creased, yellowing. The seal broken long ago. Written across the front were 3 small letters. A.E. It was addressed to no place. No street, no number. Just the initials. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in rushed, slanted pen. You were right not to forget me. Reuben stared at it in the amber glow of his desk lamp. There was no signature. No return mark. Only that one line. He turned it over. In the corner, faint and nearly rubbed away, were the words. Delivered by hand, R.L., January 14, 1952. His own initials. But he hadn't written them. Part 14, The Voice on the Wire. 2 days later, Reuben received a telephone call. His phone rang so rarely that he startled when it did. The line was faint, slightly crackling, as if traveling across some great distance. Mr. Latch? Reuben cleared his throat. Yes. I was told you have something of mine. The voice was soft. Feminine. Not young, not old, somewhere in between. And familiar. He didn't speak. You don't have to be afraid, the voice continued. You kept your records. That was the right thing. Reuben gripped the cord. Althea? A pause. Then, once. I don't understand, he whispered. I couldn't let them find me. Not then. Not after what happened to Thomas. Her words hung there, floating gently in the quiet of the room. Did he know where you went? Reuben asked. No, she said. But he tried. He risked too much to warn me. I left before they could decide he knew too much. I have the pendant, Reuben said. The cipher notes. The ledger. All of it. Keep it, she said. For now. Just, let the story rest. Let it settle like dust. And then the line went dead. Reuben sat with the receiver in his hand for a long time, the steady hum of the dial tone like a lullaby. He didn't know where she was. But she was alive. Part 15, The Ledger Closes. It was early April when Reuben made his final entry. The morning sun fell warmly across his desk, and the post office smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. A wren sang on the sill. He sipped his tea and opened the ledger one last time. In the blank space below the returned entry of 1952, he wrote. Recipient, A. Everston. Final status, alive. Entry closed, April 2, 1986. Verified by, R.L. Then he closed the book gently, tied it in brown paper, and placed it beneath the floorboard of the cellar, beneath shelf 7, where old records went to rest. He did not destroy it. He did not mail the pendant, or the cipher papers, or the letters. Instead, he let the story return to silence. The kind of silence that only small villages and old post offices seem to know. Sometimes, at night, when the wind stirred the ivy or the pipes ticked in their sleep, he thought he heard the faint rustle of paper, or the echo of a knock at the door. But no one came. The postmaster kept his secrets. And the ledger slept beneath the floor.